Hi, it's Steve Hallfish. Thanks for joining me again for another color correction tutorial in After Effects using Color Finesse. So this is the second tutorial about color correction. The first part of the tutorial was basically an introduction to Color Finesse, using Color Finesse in After Effects, and also a bit of color theory and an explanation of how you do color correction in general. This second tutorial is more going to be hands-on, taking a set of images and fixing specific examples and walking you through those examples. So before we do any color correction, I first want to show you how to apply the color correction. It's pretty simple. We select the little clip that we've got here in our After Effects timeline, and we need to add a filter to it. The filter I'm looking for is Synthetic Apertures Color Finesse, which I happen to know starts with SA and then the letter C for color, and you can see that we've got the SA Color Finesse filter comes up here. I'm just going to drag that and drop it right onto my clip. So once I've dragged that filter or double-clicked it or applied it onto this clip, it works a little differently than some of the filters in After Effects where you just start working with them in the interface right here. That is one way to do it, but what I want to do is use the full interface. It's a little bit more like Boris if you're used to that, where you call up a totally different interface to After Effects. So I'm going to click on full interface, and that's going to call up Color Finesse 3 and jump us into the Color Finesse interface. To start out with, I'm going to show you 3 different ways to correct the same image, just to give you an idea of the tools that are at your fingertips, and maybe you can find the way that works best for you. This image of me playing the piano is white balanced incorrectly, just got a little blue tone tinge to it instead of being color balanced correctly. The first way I'm going to do this is kind of the way that you might think of it in Final Cut Pro using the hue offset wheels. And to do that, I'm going to reset. And I'm going to go into my shadows. The shadows, the way that I'm going to do this, first of all, I'm going to add just a little bit of brightness to this. This is a little bit washed out. I'm going to add a little bit of gain, not much, because it looks, by the shadow detail, this does not look like it's a very high key, bright lit image. It looks like it's kind of a subdued lighting, natural lighting. So I don't want to have it too bright. Normally I would try to get my levels here in this waveform monitor all the way up to 100, but as I look at this, there's probably nothing, not even the highlight off these white keys. This is probably not 100% white. So we're just going to add a little bit of as much contrast as we can manage where it looks natural. You know, we could go brighter if we wanted to. We could actually try to go quite bright with the gain, and then bring the gamma back down to see whether that we could set a tone. But that really does some funky things with the skin tone, so I don't want to try that. A lot of doing good color correction is to try things, see how far you can push something, and if you can't push it as far as you hope, just bring it back down a little bit and set a level. So you know, I can see in the details. It's still too cool though, right? So what we're going to do is go into the hue offsets, turn them on, and our shadows, you can start dragging this out and look into the dark portions of the picture. You can see as I start to pull this center area up towards red that the blacks are actually getting pretty red. We don't want to do that. We just don't want them to be blue. So I'm going to leave that. So you can, as I start to go up, it turns too red. I pull it back down a little bit, and the blacks look much better. Skin tones still look bad, but those will do with the midtones. Grab the midtones and add some warmth to them by pulling the center area of this color wheel up towards red. If I wanted to make it more blue or more cool, I could pull it down towards blue, or I could even make it green if I wanted to, magenta. I'm going to go warm because that's you know, the more natural look for this shot that was white balanced a little cool. Now that I've got that, it also looks like maybe if I pull back on some of the red color correction I did on the shadows, and then the highlights, we can see how much highlight we want to, how much red we want to push to the highlights. It's not really doing much at all because there aren't any highlights to this image. So almost no matter what I do here, it's barely having any effect, even when I drag these pretty extreme examples. it's really doing nothing because there really are no highlights. So that's how to correct this image with hue offsets. Let's try something else. Let's try the RGB tab here. And to use the RGB tab, I'm going to go to the RGB waveform monitor because this is going to give me some really good feedback as to what I'm trying to do. If you look at this, if I reset it, that's my color correction I did already. There's the source. That's where we start from. You can see that my blacks are a little elevated, so I'm going to grab the master pedestal. I'm going to pull that down until those blacks sit right at 0. And then look at this. Red and green are about the same, and the highest levels are blue. And if you look at this image, it looks pretty blue. We actually, because this is a skin tone image, we kind of want the reverse. We want red to be a little stronger because it's a skin tone, and green to be the next highest because red and green make yellow, and there's lots of yellow in a skin tone, and blue should actually be the lowest. So what I'm going to do to fix this is I'm going to go into my red gain, and I'm going to pull that up to about 50. That's probably about a good skin tone level, about 50, 55. Then I'm going to pull my green gain so that it's just below my red gain, and I'm going to take my blue gain and I'm going to pull that down so it's below all of them. And you can see I've made a pretty good correction there. If I still feel like, hey, you know, that's still not great, it's not great skin tone, maybe we need some more red in the mid-tones. So I'm going to grab my red gamma and I'm going to give that a little boost. And you can see instantly that that's a pretty good correction. You go from that to that was the original, and that's what I was able to do using the RGB levels here and just setting a nice, basically getting these even, but a slight angle, starting with red is the highest, green is the lowest, and blue is starting with red is the highest, green next, and then blue is the lowest. If I was trying to get these skin tones to be totally gray, then I would match these from red to green to blue. If I was trying to make a neutral tone, if my hands were gray, for example, which they aren't, of course, then I would try to match these levels so that red gain would be equal to green gain, which would be equal to blue gain. And you can see as I do that and these level out, my skin tones are much more gray looking than they were before. But as we had it before, where the tone was a little bit more of on an angle from red to green to blue, we had much nicer skin tones. Let's try one final way of doing this color correction, and that is with the very intuitive curves method. The way that I'm going to do this, first reset from the way that I had it. I'm going to turn off HSL, go to Curves and RGB, and what we're going to do here is I'm going to grab the bottoms of each one of these red tabs. I could also do it in the master. Well, let's do it in the master. So I'm going to grab the master, the bottom of the master, and pull this to the right, which will lower my black levels. I can really get it black if I wanted to. I could also bring the black levels up, making it much more washed out. We're going to set those black levels right at 0 by pulling them slightly to the right, and that'll come down perfectly. Now what I want to do is I want to take my midtones for my reds, greens, and blues. Actually, let's do it with the highlights, just like we did with the RGB controls. And I'm going to pull my reds up to about 50-something, 55. I'm going to pull my greens down just below that, and I'm going to pull my blue highlights using the very top of this curve. I'm going to pull those down below the green levels. That's pretty good. And if I want to do that same little boost that I did to make this hand a little redder in the midtones, I'll grab a section right in the middle of this red curve and I'll just give it a little lift, and you can see there's my correction from the source to the result. A really nice fix of this poor white balance and a much nicer shot. This is a little piece of video from my buddy Randy Reeson here in Chicago, a great shooter, did a documentary on ultralights. And this is the source footage, pretty washed out. This is an old Betacam, some old Betacam footage. And then this is kind of where I took it, which is definitely improved, I think you would agree. So let's figure out how we got there. So we're basically going to reset. So we just did a curves. Let's try this with the RGB controls. As you can see on the RGB waveform monitor, there really aren't any blacks. There's nothing below about 20 IRE here, or 20%. And there is some white, which is definitely these buildings. So we've got some good brights. We don't have a lot of dark blacks. So let's try to get some of those first. First thing I'm going to do is go to my red pedestal and bring that down. Don't worry that it looks funky. I'm just going to bring it down to about there. I'm going to go to my green pedestal and make it match the red pedestal. Just matching kind of the shapes and the position of these two items. Green might still be a little high. And then I'm going to pull the blue pedestal down to match those. Now that we've got those kind of matching, the next thing I want to do is bring my gain back up. And my gammas. What I'm really going to do is just try to get a good green color in the out of the foliage, the whatever the farmer is growing down there and the trees. I've kind of got a good green color, but it's a little weak. So I'm going to go into my red gamma and my blue gamma. Just trying to get a nice natural green, beautiful green tone to the grass. Starting to get better. Now that I've got that, the shot's looking a lot better. We went from there to there. Definitely significantly better. Notice that the green channel is higher than our red channel and our blue channel, which are both pretty even. The red and the blue are matching pretty well. The green is higher, which is fine because we have all this green foliage, so there should be more green in the green channel. Now what I want to do is I still want to tweak this a little bit. I'm going to add a couple of things. Let's go to curves and let's add some contrast. Maybe richen up the greens by pulling the shadows down a little bit. Don't want to bring up the farmhouses too much because they'll start to draw attention to themselves too much. And what we really want to draw attention to is this canopy on this thing, this ultralight. Now, one of the ways that we can do that is right now, or at least in our source, the kind of this blue-green of the grass and the blue-green of the canopy, doesn't really jump out at you very much. We want it to really stand out, and there's a couple of ways we can do that. The main way, of course, is with secondaries. Just like we did with skin tones, if we sample the secondary color, this blue color right there, then we're going to switch over to Show Preview and not mask, sorry, alpha. Now we're going to just adjust the tolerances. We're going to adjust the chroma tolerance, in other words, how much saturation there is. That really doesn't do anything. Luma tolerance, okay, so now we're getting more and more of the canopy, which is a good thing. We can just keep going until we start, actually we never get anywhere other than just pure canopy. So the higher we can go, the more we can create a mask that just has the canopy, the better off we're going to be. And then we can soften that a little bit. Don't want to bring too much of something else in, but we also don't want it to cut off in funny ways. So I brought up the softness a lot. Now we're going to turn off the preview and know that in that white area, anything that I do with these sliders or this thing will only happen inside the canopy. See, I can turn the canopy completely purple if I want to. Blue, green, red doesn't really work because it was so blue to begin with. But we can definitely push where we kind of had the canopy was a little bit towards green, the more we push it towards blue, the more it's going to stand out from the grass, which is green. Don't want to go purple with it, but if we go blue, that's a good thing. The other things we can do is kind of mess with the saturation if we wanted to. We don't want to go too saturated that it's illegal. We can bring the gain, kind of play with that to figure out what looks good. Just kind of dial that in. The gamma will probably even have more effect because that color is in the gamma range. Just kind of bring that down a little bit, and it really starts to make that pop. And the pedestal, let's see if that does anything. Yeah, it does. So now we've gone from our source, which was all very washed out and everything was kind of the same greenish color, and now we've got nice green, rich green tones of grass and a very blue canopy. A much better shot there. A great correction from kind of boring to popping. So here's actually, this is my Uncle Bob's old racer from back in the 50s, and it's some old 8mm footage that I transferred myself years before I knew anything about color correction, and I did a pretty poor job of the transfer, and also the footage is just aging and kind of archival looking. It just does not look right. So let's fix that with Color Finesse. We'll go into the full interface. This is what I've done to it in the RGB mode. Let's turn that off, and let's do this one in curves. So looking at our RGB waveform across here, what we want to do is, first of all, we want to get rid of this kind of milkiness and all this noise that's down here in the blacks. So I'm going to pull down the red channel until it just touches this line, this 0 line. And I'm going to do the same thing with green. And I'm going to do the same thing with blue. So now the levels in my blacks are all about equal. The difference here, though, is look at how much red there is here, how much higher the red channel is than the green or the blue channel. It's quite a bit different. We also want to raise the brightness. This shot's a little washed out. So I'm actually going to raise the red even higher than I had it before. If you see up here, there is a little bit of red that's peeking up here. I'm just going to back off until that goes away. Or not goes away, but that's about right. Just going to leave it about there, and then I'm going to try to match the green and the blue channels to that same shape. So I want to try to get this up to about here. I'm just going to do that by grabbing the top of this curve, just sliding it backwards until it pretty much matches this shape here, matches this shape here. Now blue is too low too. So I'm going to grab that and bring that up to the same level as the other two. And you can see that we've got a pretty good match between here, here, and here. They all pretty much match, and if you look at our car, instead of being pink, our car is now white, which is the correct color of old J61. And if we wanted to, you're starting to see a little bit noise in the blacks. We could just grab our master curve, pull that down a little bit to add some contrast and also to kind of hide some of that noise that we're starting to get. And if we wanted to, we could even see if we could get some more contrast, bring up those highlights of the car itself. Don't go too crazy, but get it a little bit more poppy look than the very flat, low contrast look that we had before. And that's our shot. So let me show you one more final correction, just kind of show you how far you can pull a shot from being what seems to be unusable into the land of usability. Here is this footage, which is just a horrendous color. This is actually the source color here, and these are the curves that I use to turn it into the correct colors. Let's see if we can figure out how to do this. If I reset my curves and we look at the RGB waveform again, we can see that our reds, green, and blue channels, the black levels, are radically different. So I'm going to pull those red channels down, pull the green channel down in the blacks, just the bottom of the black, to match the other one, and blue I'm going to do the same thing. Now we're going to make sure that the highlights match. So I'm going to grab the highlight of red and I'm going to pull it down. It's clipped a little bit, but we're going to pull that down. Green, I'm going to pull that up until it too actually clips, because we're going to match it to the other. We're going to try to have this match between red and green. Pull it back just a bit. Try to get this shape here, which is probably the garage door, which is white. Looks like there's a little more green in it right now. So I'm going to back that off and then add the blue channel. Get that to the same point. You can also see now that in our midtones, the red, green, and blue channels are pretty different. So if I want to, I can grab my green channel and just pull that down right about the 50% mark or 60% mark. That seems a little high in the green channel compared to the red channel. And the blue channel, actually, this is one of those tricky points. It looks like the blue channel is lower than the red and the green channel, and it actually is. But you have to look at the section of the screen that matches the section of the waveform monitor. So as you're looking horizontally, this side matches this side of the image, and this side over here matches this side or this side or this side of the image. So where the red, green, and blue don't match up, if you actually look, is this section of the image right here. Now this is my house and I know that this siding on my house is actually kind of a tan color or a skin tone color, in which case red and green matching is actually about right, and there shouldn't be a lot of blue. What I want to have match, though, is the white of the garage door and of this post of this this bench. And right across here, they are pretty much matching. Maybe a little too much blue. That's a little bit closer. And then what we also want to do, because this is so washed out, is just grab our blacks, just bring them down a little bit. And the whites, we probably don't want to bring the whites up because that'll just wash everything out or blow everything out. So we'll just keep that right around there. And there's quite a bit of green in the mid-tone of this bucket, which is actually probably right. It's probably reflecting some green foliage. But if we wanted to, we could also just pull some of the green out of that, out of the image, make it look a little nicer. What you want to do when you're doing this is figure out what's the opposite of green, and the opposite of green is magenta. So when you see the whites or the midtones start to go magenta, when you're pulling down green, you know you've gone too far. So with a good understanding of your tools and a good understanding of the monitors that allow you to analyze the signal, you should be able to do some great color correction using Synthetic Aperture's Color Finesse inside of After Effects.